In an upstairs room in the Capitol, Senator Ted Kennedy slammed his hand down on the table with a force that shook the room. His hefty body, now raised from his seat, angled across the solid wooden surface as he glared at President George H.W. Bush's Chief of Staff, John Sununu. Their heads inches apart. Kennedy screamed at Sununu, "You want to fight? Fight with me. You want to yell? Yell at me." Kennedy's face was red with anger, the tendons bulging from his neck. Sununu suddenly became pale and quiet and backed down. So at that table were all of the sort of major senators involved in the act. And the meeting was called together because after 10 weeks of staff-level negotiations between the White House and the Senate, some progress had been made, but a deadlock was now apparent. The heavyweights, who were Orrin Hatch, Tom Harkin, Bob Dole, Attorney General Dick Thornburgh, and others, got together to see what could be done. Only one by one they came in, and Harkin brought along his aide, Bobby Silverstein, who was one of the people who drafted the ADA that they were discussing. He was a lawyer. And after some brief chit-chat, the principals began their own discussion. Sununu served as the point person for the White House and was known to be a hardliner and official bad cop. Hatch leaned over and whispered into the ear of his staffer, "You watch. In 15 minutes, you'll see how impassioned Kennedy is about this bill." And as you know, Kennedy himself had family members who were disabled. His sister was cognitively disabled, and of course his son lost a leg to cancer. And many of the Republicans also in the room were, even though they were conservatives, were for the bill because they themselves also had family members involved. Silverstein, peering through his large glasses into the mysterious abyss of the pages upon pages of legislation, had been silently noting and mentally rebutting Sununu's objections. Kennedy cautioned Sununu, "You're fly-specking the bill." But Sununu continued picking away. What if there was a barbershop on the second floor of an existing building in New Hampshire? Would you expect a poor barber to have to install an elevator and to accommodate some wheelchair-using customer in need of a haircut? But Sununu, finally, Silverstein kept rebutting these kinds of objections. And finally, Sununu became irritated. He started speaking to Silverstein in a controlled voice, but worked his way up to more impassioned tones. "Every time I say something, you're always bringing something up. I don't want to hear from you anymore." Harkin, sitting between Silverstein and Kennedy, was just shuffling his papers, trying to think how to defend his own aide, when Kennedy jumped to his feet, his bulky frame creating seismic jolts as it crashed against the table. The hours of negotiation, indeed the years of maneuvering to get this bill through Congress, were taking their toll. Harkin remembers, "I thought Kennedy was going to grab Sununu by the collar." Kennedy pointed his finger at Sununu's face and bellowed, "If you want to yell at anybody, you yell at me, or you yell at Senator Harkin. You don't go after the staff. You go after the big boys. You got something to say it to me." In a moment of disgust with Silverstein and his ilk, Sununu then suggested that the room be cleared of all staff and that only elected members of Congress should stay. Kennedy's response, "I said fine, then Sununu should leave because he was staff." That seemed to quiet things down. Kennedy sat back as an awkward silence filled the room. Sununu's usually robust frame seemed to sink down in his chair. His face was drained of color, and an hour and a half later, an agreement had been reached. So that is the story that, when I was writing this book, I heard this story from so many people. That's the story. And it's a nice story because it shows, again, this idea that someone's resisting, someone is aggressively going after them, and then because of that, the ADA went through. It's true that it happened. It's not true that that was a decisive moment. In fact, and one of the things I talk about in the book, if you are interested, here are some of the people who are at the meeting, Harkin, Dole, and this is Kennedy with a group of Dredif the day of the signing. What I wanted to get to was, what really was happening is this issue, which I can't go into, but there were secret, illegal meetings that were going on during this whole time between the different parties, and these are some of the people involved. They were called the Bagel Breakfast. They were held at the house of the woman with the large shoulder pads. And it really was 10 weeks of negotiating there that produced the result that the Senate was able to pass, agree with the White House and pass the bill. The story is a good illustration, but it's a lot less complicated than what really happened.